And we're watching some of the travesties, some of the things that are happening right now, and it's hard to believe when you look at what is going on with Russia and Ukraine. That was never going to happen under this administration. It was nothing ever like that ever going to happen. Taiwan will be next with China, and lots of other bad things are happening. And I think a lot of it started when we had that horrible execution, the way they did it, and not keeping Bagram right next to China, 1 hour away from their nuclear plant where they make their nuclear weapons, was disgraceful. I mean, we gave away billions and billions of dollars, and much more important than that. But the way they executed that withdrawal was a very sad day, and I think it's only been downhill from there. But that was, as bad as the borders have been, and they've been the worst ever, I think that was the lowest point in the history of our country in terms of embarrassment.
Embarrassment, a shock, and a day of national disgrace. And I think most Americans are still gut sick at what they witnessed and what we know to have happened, and the fact that Americans remain there. If I may, Mr. President, a lot of working Americans right now in this country are struggling, as you know. The pandemic, the mandates, closed schools, shuttered small business, high inflation, a slowing economy, fears for their families. I'd like to get your thoughts about the very people, the forgotten Americans who you serve first and foremost as president, and your concerns about them.
Well, I'm very concerned about the economy. Inflation is rampant, and people are not working like they did. If you look at what we did, we had the best wage picture and just about every other picture for Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, African Americans, everybody, women, people with diplomas, people without diplomas, every single group we were number one. And you look at what's going on right now. I think two things. The mandates are a disaster. I really think they hurt the economy very badly, really badly. And the other was the energy situation. We were energy independent, and now we're buying from Russia. I saw something out today where we bought 18,000 barrels or whatever during my last year from Russia, and now we're up to 206,000. Russia's doing extremely well, Lou, extremely well with this whole thing. And I stopped the pipeline, and now they have the pipeline. And we would have done great with Russia. We were going to do deals with Russia. We could have done a wonderful thing with Russia, but now there's a lot of dislike, and I think there's a lot of disrespect on behalf of Russia toward us because of what happened over the last year. They look at what's happening with our country and they're laughing. They are laughing out loud.
Unfortunately, they're not alone around the world in that regard. And in this country, something that we didn't think we would ever see. You talked about you created energy independence for America. It took this president less than a year to remove our independence and create dependency again. And now store shelves in many places are empty. There are shortages of all kinds of essentials for all kinds of products. They're bare shelves. The corporate media calls all of that supply chain disruption. But it is clear, certainly, that if corporate America had listened to you and put America first, hired American, bought American, brought their plants back to the United States, there would be no so-called supply chain disruption. There would be no shortages and no bare shelves. Your thoughts upon witnessing what we are witnessing today?
Well, nobody ever even heard the term supply chain. This was the thing. Let's talk about the supply chain. It was automatic. It just was embedded, and it was embedded in a free country, in a democracy. It was embedded in our country. We didn't sit around talking about supply chain. Now, all of a sudden, that's all the two words that people are using most because you can't get anything. You look at big grocery stores, big chains, they have empty shelves. 60-70% of the shelves are empty in some cases. In some cases, more than that. They can't get food. They can't get clothing. I just did a book which is very successful. They sold 240,000 copies, and we just ordered another 240,000, I guess, or more. And the publisher, the printer, who's one of the biggest in the country, I think said he has 8 plants. He said, well, we have one problem. We can't get paper We can't get ink,
Oh my
we
gosh.
can't get glue, and we can't get leather for the covers. He said, I've been doing this for 40 years. I've never had a problem getting anything. It was too much. I could have made any deal I wanted. Now I can't get even paper. He said, I'm paying a huge premium to get things that normally I would have never even thought about. So nobody talked about supply chain, and now we have even that messed up. Our country is a mess. Our country is an absolute disaster. And what's happening on our border is not to be believed, what's going in and what's coming into our country, including drugs, by the way.
Drugs by the tons,
At a record level.
And you and Mark Morgan, your commissioner of the Customs and Border Protection, he now says the number will be 3 million illegal immigrants who have tried to enter the United States in President Biden's first year. Contrast that against what you had managed to do, despite the opposition of the Democratic Party, despite the opposition of the deep state, and many within your own party, to build a significant part of the wall on that border, to bring down illegal immigration to the levels not seen in 30 years. Your thoughts?
Well, we got the wall done, and it could have been totally completed in 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. And amazingly, he stopped it right at the beginning, which told me that either they're grossly incompetent or they are believers in open borders. But most of it's completed, and if I didn't have to fight for 2.5 years, and don't forget I had Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell fighting with me the first 2 years, but they really, they're subversive as far as I'm concerned. But I got it done. I won lawsuits. I won 11 lawsuits, and many of them from Congress and the Democrats. We won, and we started, and we did almost 500 miles of wall, and really powerful wall. I got Mexico to give us free of charge, 28,000 soldiers to guard us, because otherwise I would have had to put tariffs on them, I explained. And so we had the soldiers, and we got the numbers down, the lowest we've ever been as a country, ever. There's never been anything like it. The border was very close to being sealed, and we did a great job, and we stopped the drugs to a large extent. I think drugs were down 67%. Now I'm understanding drugs could be up maybe 10 times higher than the highest level ever. Think of that, 10 times higher. And that's the worst, some of the worst drugs in the world, pouring through Mexico, right. In many cases made in China and sent over here. And it's the worst it's ever been. A year ago, it was the best it's ever been. Now it's the worst it's ever been. So we did a great job at the border. But, when you remand those orders, when you take away the orders of what we had with remain in Mexico, in other words, when people came up, Lou, they had to stay in Mexico. Now, you don't have to be a super genius to know that sounds like a good idea. And they ended that. And they were just forced by the courts to go back to it. But now they're going back to a very weakened version. And now they can't get Mexico to agree to it anymore, which I did very easily. They were great. The president of Mexico is a wonderful guy, actually. He's slightly different. He tends to be a socialist, but we got along very well. But, when you look at what's happening with the drugs, with the people, the human traffickers, the drug dealers that are pouring in to our country, Lou, they're destroying our country. You know it Absolutely. Better than anybody. You say it better than anybody. They're destroying our country.
And you talked about China. China is the source of most fentanyl that is brought into this country. Most of that does not come through the ports on the West Coast, as you know. But I think our audience may be surprised to find that the majority of fentanyl, which kills thousands, tens of thousands of Americans every year, is coming across that southern border. And yet the Democratic Party is aligned with China. Corporate America is aligned with China because they want that border open. They want that cheap illegal labor still crossing that border. It goes on. And meanwhile, the radical Dems, the neo-Marxists, simply regard it all as collateral damage, just so corporate America can have labor, so they can have open borders, and of course, more prospective Democratic voters. It's outrageous, isn't it? So
when you look at what's happened, and when you look at, they probably, they have some crazy policy. If they didn't cheat on elections, they're not a 50-50 party. When you have defund the police, when you have no voter ID and sanctuary cities and weak military and all of the different things, high interest rates, when you have high taxes, they're going to raise your taxes like crazy. They already are. That's not a 50-50 party. They cheat on the election. We found that out very strongly, and that I guess that continues to come out at a very rapid pace. But it's really sad what's going on with our country. When you look at it, people are not even believing it. I will say, so I'll be in Texas this weekend. We'll be fairly near Houston, Texas. We're going to have a tremendous crowd, and we're having more people show up now than we did before the election, and we were strong before the election. We did great in the election. You know, I said, Lou, I ran twice. The first time I did well. The second time I did much better. I got 12 million more votes. We did much better the second time.
Absolutely.
I said that to a reporter from the failing New York Times. I said, you know, I ran twice. Second time I did much better. They looked, what do you mean? What do you mean? I said, well, I got 12 million more votes. It's right. And I was told if I got the same number, you know, most get the same or less if they run a second term. And you can still win when you get less. I was told by the smartest people in the business, if you got the same number, 63 million, you win. And we got 75 million, and it didn't work out that way. Really a disgraceful situation. You know that very well. You covered it really well. And I'm so glad you have the podcast or whatever you want to call it now, because your voice is so important, Lou. So important.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. You know, it's a very simple thing. We're trying to get to the truth. I was demanding investigations throughout. I personally can't say that one way or the other, you know, that after an investigation, what would have been the outcome. But I do know this, and I think most Americans, when they're honest, know this. There were so many irregularities, so many anomalies, as they're called, so many bizarre instances where it looked like someone was committing fraud, because otherwise, why would they put cardboard over windows to keep prying eyes away? And why would they push away Republican poll watchers and not permit them near the counting process? The list goes on,
in Detroit,
as you well know. Detroit, Pennsylvania, Georgia, the list goes on, as we know. And the idea that people are trying to stop the investigations that are underway. I mean, bald-faced.
They fight like hell. Did not, Lou. They fight like hell so that the facts don't come out. But the facts have come out, and they're coming out all the time now. I mean, at a level, you see what's going on with all of the. They accumulate votes and they put them in. You're not allowed to do it. So many different places. They accumulate, call it ballot harvesting, and they accumulate thousands of votes and they just dump them. It's such a phony deal. This whole thing with the ballots, you know, with the mail-in ballots, it's a terrible, terrible thing for this country. This country, we don't have